They told her to sign. They told her she was lucky to leave with her dignity, because she certainly wasn't leaving with a dime. 5 years ago, Aurora Jenkins stood in a rainy Manhattan alleyway, clutching a plastic bag of clothes, while her billionaire husband toasted champagne with his mistress in the penthouse above. He thought he had erased her. He thought he had won. But he made one fatal calculation. He didn't realize that the useless shell company he dumped on her to hide his bad debt wasn't a liability. It was a weapon. And today, she didn't just come back to get even. She came back to sign his paycheck. This is the story of how the discarded wife became the billionaire's new owner. The air inside the conference room at Sterling & Company smelled of stale coffee and expensive leather, but to Aurora it smelled like a funeral. "Sign here, Mrs. Sterling, and here, and initial the bottom of page 42. The lawyer, a man named Arthur Penn, with teeth too white for his age and a suit that cost more than Aurora's childhood home, tapped the mahogany table with a Mont Blanc pen. He didn't look at her. Nobody looked at her. Across the table sat Alexander Sterling. The man who had once promised to build the world for her was now checking his watch, a limited edition. Patek Philippe, clearly bored by the destruction of their 7-year marriage. "Come on, Aurora." Alexander sighed, his voice smooth. The same voice that had charmed Wall Street investors and tech giants alike. "Let's not make this theatrical. You get the lump sum we agreed on, $20,000, to help you get settled, and you walk away. Clean break. No alimony. No contesting the prenup." 20,000? Aurora whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in 3 days. "Alexander, I managed the books for the first 3 years. I know what this company is worth. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans under Vanguard Holdings. I helped you build this." Alexander laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a soft, pitying chuckle that hurt worse than a scream. He leaned forward, his ice-blue eyes locking onto hers. "You were a secretary, Aurora. You answered phones and made coffee. You didn't build anything. I built this. My name is on the building. My blood is in the concrete." He motioned to the stunning woman sitting in the corner, Isabella, his consultant, who was currently scrolling through Instagram, ignoring the devastation in the room. "Isabella is helping me take the company to the next level. We need refined energy. You're just..." He waved his hand dismissively. "Exhausted." Arthur Penn slid the final document forward. "The assets you requested, Aurora, the shell entity." Alexander smirked. "Ah, yes. Obsidian Logistics." This was the final insult. During the mediation, Aurora had begged for a small percentage of stock. Alexander had refused. Instead, he offered her Obsidian Logistics, a defunct subsidiary that held nothing but rusted shipping containers in New Jersey, and according to Alexander, about $500,000 in debt. "It's a liability, Aurora," Alexander said, feigning concern. "But if you want to play CEO, take it. It's yours. Consider it a parting gift. You take the debt, I take the freedom." Aurora looked at the papers. She looked at Isabella, who finally looked up, offering a tight, victorious smile. She looked at Alexander, the man she had nursed through a nervous breakdown in 2016 when the market crashed. She picked up the pen. She didn't cry. Tears were for people who had hope. Aurora had none. She signed her name, Aurora Jenkins, dropping the Sterling instantly. "Done," Arthur Penn said, snatching the papers away as if afraid she might contaminate them. "Good luck, Aurora," Alexander said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Try not to spend that 20 grand all in one place." 10 minutes later, Aurora was standing on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. It had started to rain. She had no umbrella. She had a suitcase, a check for $20,000, and ownership of a company that was technically bankrupt. A black town car pulled out of the garage. Through the tinted window, she saw Alexander and Isabella. They were laughing. Aurora watched the taillights disappear into the grey New York traffic. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was cold. It was hard. It was the feeling of a foundation being poured. "Obsidian Logistics," she muttered to the rain. She hailed a cab. "Take me to Newark," she told the driver. "Newark? That's a hall, lady. Just drive." She wasn't going to a hotel. She was going to see what she actually owned. If Rock Bottom had a physical address, it was 404 Industrial Way. The headquarters of Obsidian Logistics was a corrugated metal shack surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The yard was filled with weeds and about 30 shipping containers that looked like they hadn't moved since the Carter administration. Aurora stepped out of the cab, dragging her suitcase through the mud. The security guard, an older man named Frank, with a grey beard and a suspicious glare, slid the window open. "We ain't hiring," Frank grunted. "I'm not looking for a job," Aurora said, pulling the deed out of her purse. It was wet at the edges. "I'm the owner." Frank squinted at the paper, then at her. He spat on the ground. "Owner Sterling finally dumped this heap, huh? Poor girl." He buzzed the gate open. Inside the shack, it was freezing. There was a single desk, a computer that still ran Windows 95, and a filing cabinet. Aurora sat in the dusty chair. She had $20,000 to her name. She had rent to pay. She had food to buy, and she had a graveyard of rusty metal. She spent the first week sleeping in the shack. She bought a space heater and a sleeping bag. She couldn't waste money on an apartment yet. She needed to understand why Alexander had given her this. He said it was debt-ridden. She started digging through the filing cabinets. Most of it was garbage old invoices shipping manifests from the early 2000s. But on the third night, around 2 a.m., fueled by instant coffee and rage, she found a red folder taped to the back of the bottom drawer. The label read, "Project Titan, 1998. Aurora opened it. It wasn't shipping records, it was land deeds. She began to read, her eyes widening. Obsidian Logistics didn't just own the containers. They owned the land the containers sat on. And not just this lot. She cross-referenced the coordinates on her phone. The lot at 404 Industrial Way was adjacent to the Newark railway line. But there was another deed. A narrow strip of land, barely 50 feet wide, stretching 3 miles north. Alexander had bought Obsidian years ago to strip its assets and forgot about it. He thought it was just a holding company for bad trucking loans. He never looked at the physical land surveys. He was a tech guy, a stock guy. He didn't care about dirt. But Aurora looked at the map. That narrow strip of land cut right between the main highway and the newly proposed site for the Atlantic Data Center, a project being spearheaded by Norcross Tech, a rival of Alexander's. If Norcross wanted to run fiber optic cables or power lines to their new massive data center, they had to cross her land. Or they had to go 10 miles around, costing them millions. Aurora sat back, her breath visible in the cold air. Alexander had handed her a winning lottery ticket because he was too arrogant to scratch it off. But she couldn't sell it. Not yet. If she sold it now, she'd get a few 100,000. Maybe 1 million. That wasn't enough. Not for what she wanted to do. She didn't want comfort. She wanted leverage. She needed a lawyer, a real one. Not the sharks Alexander employed, but a wolf. The next morning, she went to the public library and looked up Harrison Cole. Harrison Cole was legendary in New York, not for being rich, but for being vicious. He had been a corporate raider in the 80s until a scandal forced him into semi-retirement. He operated out of a brownstone in Brooklyn and hated everyone, especially billionaires like Alexander Sterling. Aurora took the train to Brooklyn. She waited on his stoop for 6 hours. When Harrison finally arrived carrying a bag of groceries and looking more like a disgruntled professor than a legal genius, he stepped over her. "I'm not interested," he barked. "I own the choke point to the Atlantic Data Center," Aurora said from the ground. Harrison stopped. He didn't turn around. "The Sterling divorcee. I read about it in the Post. You got fleeced." "I got Obsidian," she said, standing up. "And Obsidian owns the easement rights for the entire western grid of the industrial park. Alexander thinks it's debt. It's actually a toll booth." Harrison turned slowly. He looked at her cheap coat, her muddy shoes, and the fire in her eyes. He smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. "Come inside," he said. "Do you drink scotch 3 years later?" The transformation wasn't overnight. It was a grind. With Harrison's help, Aurora didn't sell the land. She leased the rights. Norcross Tech paid her $4 million up front for the easement plus royalties on the data transmission lines. She took that $4 million and didn't buy a house. She didn't buy clothes. She bought debt. Specifically, she began quietly purchasing the distress debt of Sterling Dynamics suppliers. Alexander was expanding aggressively, leveraging his company to the hilt to build a new AI headquarters in San Francisco. He was slow paying his vendors. He was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. Aurora, operating under a holding company named Nemesis Ventures, bought the invoices. When the steel supplier wasn't paid by Alexander, Aurora paid them 80 cents on the dollar and took the IOU. When the glass manufacturer was stiffed, Aurora bought the debt. By 2023, Alexander Sterling didn't realize it, but he effectively owed millions of dollars not to a dozen different vendors, but to one entity, Nemesis Ventures. Aurora sat in a modern office in Midtown Manhattan. It was sleek, minimalist, and warm. She wore a tailored white suit, sharp, expensive, powerful. Harrison Cole sat opposite her, looking healthier than he had in years. "The Q3 reports are in," Harrison said, sliding a tablet across the glass desk. "Sterling is vulnerable. He's overextended on the AI project. The banks are getting nervous. If one major creditor calls in a debt, it triggers a default clause on his primary loans." "Who is his major creditor?" Aurora asked, swirling her sparkling water. "Technically, we are—" Harrison grinned. "We hold 40% of his short-term operational debt. If we demand payment today, he doesn't have the cash. He'll have to liquidate assets." "Not assets," Aurora corrected. "Equity. You want to force a swap? I don't want his money, Harrison. I want his seat." Aurora stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Alexander was probably toasting another victory with Isabella. Rumor had it they were on the rocks that Isabella was tired of his increasing paranoia about money. "Initiate the default notice," Aurora said calmly. "Give him 48 hours to pay $40 million. "He'll call a meeting," Harrison warned. "He'll want to meet the owner of Nemesis Ventures." Aurora turned her silhouette, framed by the city lights. "Good," she said. "Tell him the owner is available on Friday at the old conference room at Sterling and Company. He's going to have a heart attack when you walk in." "No," Aurora said coldly. "He's going to have a reality check." Alexander Sterling stood on the balcony of his 44th floor office, looking down at the fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge. In his hand was a glass of 18-year-old Scotch. In his mind, he was a god. The press release had gone out that morning. Sterling Dynamics unveils the sentient AI processor. The stock had bumped up 4% in pre-market trading. He turned back to the room where Isabella was lounging on a white leather sofa, looking at swatches for curtains for their new vacation home in Aspen. "The Aspen house needs a heated driveway, Alex," Isabella said, not looking up from her iPad. "I'm not shoveling snow." "Get 2 heated driveways." Alexander laughed, feeling the warmth of the alcohol. "Get a heated roof. We're up 3 points. That's 50 million in market cap just since breakfast." The heavy oak doors burst open. It wasn't his assistant. It was Arthur Penn, his lawyer. Arthur looked older than he had 3 years ago. His tan was fading, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Arthur, I didn't schedule a buzzkill," Alexander quipped. "Put the drink down, Alexander," Arthur said, his voice trembling. He slammed a thick folder onto the glass desk. The sound had echoed like a gunshot. Alexander frowned. "What is this?" "A default notice," Arthur said, loosening his tie. "From Nemesis Ventures." Alexander scoffed, walking over to the desk and flipping the cover open with a dismissive finger. "Nemesis never heard of them. Some bottom feeder trying to sue for a patent infringement. Pay them off." "They aren't suing you, Alex. They own you." Arthur pulled a chair out and sat down heavily. "You know how we've been delaying payments to Torres Steel for the server racks and global cooling systems for the data center, ventilation, and Apex logistics for the shipping. Standard operating procedure." Alexander shrugged. "Stretch the payables. Keep cash on hand for the AI launch. They'll get paid next quarter." "No, they won't," Arthur snapped. "Because they sold their debt. Torres sold your invoices 6 months ago. Global sold them 3 months ago. Apex sold last week. Someone has been buying up every single IOU you've issued for the last 2 years. Alexander felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. "Who?" "Nemesis Ventures," Arthur repeated. "They hold $42 million in short-term matured debt. And because you missed the revised payment window with Apex yesterday, they triggered the cross-default clause in your primary lending agreement." Alexander dropped his glass. It didn't break. It just thudded onto the plush carpet, spilling amber liquid everywhere. "Cross-default," Alexander whispered. It means the banks can call in the main loan," Arthur said, burying his face in his hands. "The $200 million loan for the AI campus. But Nemesis is being generous. They are giving you 48 hours to pay the $42 million in full. Cash." "We don't have $42 million in cash," Alexander roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "It's all tied up in R&D. It's in the stock. I can't liquidate stock during a product launch. The SEC will investigate me for insider dumping, and the share price will crash." Isabella stood up slowly. The curtain swatches slid to the floor. "Alex, what does this mean? What about Aspen?" "Shut up about Aspen," Alexander snapped at her. He turned back to Arthur. "Who is behind Nemesis? Is it Norcross? Is it Musk? Who is coming for me?" "We don't know," Arthur said. "It's a blind trust." Registered in Delaware. Represented by a law firm in Brooklyn, a guy named Harrison Cole. Cole. Alexander narrowed his eyes. That dinosaur, he's been dead for 10 years. He's very much alive, and he's demanding a meeting. Alexander paced the room. He was a shark. He had eaten lesser men for breakfast. This was just a shakedown. Someone wanted a piece of the pie. He would intimidate them. He would charm them. He would destroy them. Set the meeting, Alexander hissed. Where? They insisted on New York, Arthur said. Friday, 9 a.m. Fine. Get the jet ready. Alexander adjusted his cufflinks, though his hands were shaking slightly. I'm going to go to New York, look this Harrison Cole in the eye, and remind him who Alexander Sterling is. Thursday, October the 12th, 2023. The jet. The flight to New York was silent. Isabella sat across from him, sipping water, her eyes glued to her phone. She wasn't looking at curtains anymore. She was looking at her own bank accounts. You're quiet, Alexander said, staring out the window at the clouds. Just thinking, Isabella said coldly. About what? About how you told me you were a billionaire, she said. But it seems like you're just a man with a lot of debt and a very expensive lease. It's a liquidity crunch, Isabella. It happens to everyone. Bezos, Gates, they all faced this. They didn't have their wives kicked to the curb with 20 grand, Isabella muttered. Alexander froze. What did you say? Nothing, she replied, putting her headphones on. Alexander felt a surge of nausea. He realized for the first time in years how alone he was. He thought about Aurora. Aurora, who used to make him tea with honey when he couldn't sleep. Aurora, who checked the spreadsheets 3 times to make sure he wasn't overextended. Aurora, whom he had discarded like trash because she wasn't shiny enough for his new life. She's probably struggling to pay rent in Jersey, he thought, a cruel comfort settling in his chest. At least I'm not her. He landed in Teterboro that night. He didn't sleep. Friday, October the 13th, 2023. 8:55 a.m. The location Nemesis chose was a psychological power play. They hadn't chosen a neutral hotel conference room or Harrison Cole's office. They had chosen the boardroom at Sterling and Company Alexander's old office in Manhattan, the building he still owned but rarely visited since moving operations to the West Coast, the building where he had divorced Aurora. Why here? Alexander grumbled as he exited the elevator on the 30th floor. The hallway was empty. The receptionist was gone. He had fired the New York staff months ago to cut costs. Arthur Penn walked beside him, carrying a briefcase that felt like it contained a bomb. Isabella trailed behind, wearing sunglasses indoors. They entered the conference room. It looked exactly the same as it had 4 years ago. The same mahogany table, the same view of the rainy city. Sitting at the far end of the table was an old man with wild white hair and a tweed jacket. Harrison Cole. He was eating a bagel. Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, not standing up. You look tired. Cut the crap, Cole, Alexander barked, throwing his coat onto a chair. He took the seat at the head of the table, his seat. Who are you representing? Who is hiding behind your skirt? I want a name. Harrison chewed slowly. You're in default, Mr. Sterling. The name doesn't matter. The money matters. Do you have the 42 million? I have assets, Alexander said, leaning forward, turning on the charm. Look, Harrison, we're both reasonable men. My company is on the verge of a breakthrough that will change the world. If you force a bankruptcy now, you get pennies on the dollar. But if you give me 6 months, I can pay you back with 10% interest. Hell, 15%. Harrison smiled. We aren't interested in interest. Then what do you want? Stock options? I can give you 2% of the company. We want a debt for equity swap, Harrison said calmly. Fine, Alexander sighed. 3%? That's generous. No, a voice came from the doorway. Alexander spun around in his chair. The door to the private executive washroom opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that looked like it had been tailored in Milan. Her hair, once tied back in a messy bun during their marriage, was now a sleek, sharp bob. She wore heels that clicked with authority on the hardwood floor. She didn't look tired. She didn't look exhausted. She looked lethal. Alexander squinted. His brain refused to process the image. Aurora, he choked out. Aurora Jenkins didn't smile. She walked past him, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her, a scent far more sophisticated than the vanilla body spray she used to wear. She walked to the other end of the table and stood next to Harrison Cole. Hello, Alexander, she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the emotion that used to plague her. What are you doing here? Alexander laughed nervously, looking at Isabella, then Arthur. Did you hire her as a secretary? Cole, is this a joke? She's not the secretary, you idiot, Harrison Cole said, wiping a crumb from his lip. She's the client. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Client! Alexander stood up, his face flushing red. Aurora, you don't have $40, let alone 40 million. Sit down, Alexander, Aurora commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with such natural authority that Alexander's knees buckled and he actually sat. How? He whispered. You gave me obsidian logistics, Aurora said, placing a thin file folder on the table. You told me it was a liability. You didn't check the land surveys. I leased the easement rights to Norcross Tech. Alexander's mouth fell open. The data center blockage. That was you. That was me. Aurora nodded. I made $4 million in the first month. And do you know what I did with it? I didn't go to Aspen. I didn't buy Patek Philippe's. She leaned over the table, her eyes locking onto his. I studied you, Alexander. I watched you leverage yourself to the hilt. I watched you treat your suppliers like dirt. And I bought every single mistake you made, every unpaid invoice, every disgruntled vendor. She tapped the folder. I am Nemesis Ventures, and as of this morning I own 40% of your operational debt. This is illegal, Alexander stammered, looking at Arthur Penn. Arthur, tell her this is illegal conflict of interest. Spousal. Something. Arthur Penn shook his head slowly, looking at the floor. It's perfectly legal, Alex. She's a private citizen. She bought debt on the open market. It's business. It's revenge, Alexander screamed. No, Aurora corrected him softly. Revenge would be burning your house down. This is a hostile takeover. She signaled to Harrison. The lawyer slid a document across the long mahogany table. It stopped inches from Alexander's hands. The terms, Harrison said. Alexander looked at the document. The header read, Notice of Restructuring and Equity Transfer. Restructuring. Alexander read the first paragraph. His eyes bulged. You want 51%. You want controlling interest. If you don't sign, Aurora said, I make a phone call to the bank in exactly. She checked her watch. a simple, elegant Cartier. 9 minutes. I inform them that Sterling Dynamics is in default on its vendor payments. They will freeze your accounts by noon. Your stock will plummet by 2:00 p.m. The board will fire you by dinner. And you will walk away with nothing. You can't do this, Alexander whispered. He looked at Isabella. Bella, tell her we're building something important. Isabella was staring at Aurora. There was no mockery in Isabella's eyes anymore. Only calculation. 51%, Isabella said, her voice dry. That means she would be the boss. She would be the majority shareholder, Arthur Penn clarified. She would effectively own the company. I built this, Alexander shouted, tears forming in his eyes. I am the visionary. You can't run a tech company, Aurora. You're a nobody. I don't need to run the tech, Aurora said calmly. I need to run the business, because you clearly can't. You're hemorrhaging cash, you're alienating partners, and you're distracted by... She glanced briefly at Isabella, then back to him. Lifestyle inflation. I won't sign. Alexander crossed his arms. Go to hell. Call the bank. I'll fight it in court. If you fight it, Harrison Cole interjected, the litigation will reveal the offshore accounts in the Caymans you used to hide assets during the divorce. Remember Vanguard Holdings. Alexander went pale. We found it, Aurora said. Arthur didn't know about it, did he? You hid that from your own lawyer. Arthur Penn looked up, shocked. Alex. You withheld assets during the discovery phase. That's perjury. That's fraud. I could be disbarred. Alexander stammered. If you sign, Aurora said, her voice softening, just a fraction offering him a lifeline. I won't report the fraud. You stay on as CEO. You get to be the face on the magazine covers. You keep your salary. You keep the jet. But the board answer to me. The finances answer to me. And I take 51% of the stock. She paused. You get to keep your dignity, Alexander, which is more than you gave me. The room was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Rain lashed against the window pane. Alexander looked at the pen. He looked at the life he had built, a house of cards held together by arrogance. He realized he had been checkmated 3 years ago, the day he handed her that deed in the rain. He picked up the pen. His hand shook violently. He signed, Alexander Sterling. He pushed the paper away and put his head in his hands. Aurora reached out and took the document. She didn't gloat. She didn't cheer. She simply checked the signature, nodded to Harrison, and placed it in her briefcase. Arthur, Aurora said, addressing the lawyer. File this with the SEC immediately. Yes, Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Sterling. What do I call you? Ms. Jenkins is fine, Aurora said. She stood up to leave. Wait, Isabella said. Aurora stopped near the door. Isabella stood up, smoothing her tight dress. She looked at Alexander, who was weeping silently into his hands, a broken man. Then she looked at Aurora, the woman holding the power. Alex is emotionally compromised, Isabella said, stepping away from Alexander. And honestly, this sentient AI project needs a new marketing lead. The current strategy is a mess. Isabella walked toward Aurora, a hopeful smile plastered on her face. I have some ideas on how to rebrand the transition, woman to woman. We could be a power team. Aurora looked at Isabella. She remembered the smirk Isabella had given her 4 years ago. She remembered the laughter in the town car. Aurora smiled. It was a bright, dazzling smile. Isabella, Aurora said warmly. Yes, Isabella beamed. Your forward. Isabella's smile vanished. Excuse me. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk in San Francisco. Whatever is left will be donated to charity. You can't, Alex. Isabella turned to him. Do something. Alexander didn't look up. He was done. Aurora opened the door. Come on, Harrison. We have a company to audit. As they walked out into the hallway, leaving the wreckage of Alexander's ego behind them, Harrison chuckled. That, Harrison said, was worth coming out of retirement for. Aurora pressed the elevator button. We're not done yet, Harrison. We got the company, Aurora. What else is there? The company was just the vessel, Aurora said, her eyes dark. Now I need to find out why Alexander was so desperate to hide Vanguard Holdings. He surrendered 51% of $1 billion company rather than let us look at those Cayman accounts. Why? Harrison stopped smiling. You think there's something worse than hidden cash? I think, Aurora said as the elevator doors opened, that Alexander wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding who he was really working for. The corner office, once Alexander's sanctuary, was now a war room. Aurora hadn't slept in 36 hours. The CEO nameplate on the desk still said Alexander Sterling, but he was sitting on the sofa looking like a ghost nursing a coffee that had gone cold hours ago. You need to stop digging, Aurora, Alexander whispered. His voice was hollow. Take the 51%. Take the money. Fire me. But don't open the Vanguard files. Aurora ignored him. She sat behind the desk, flanked by Harrison Cole and a forensic accountant named Benji, a 20-something prodigy wearing a hoodie. I've cracked the shell, Benji said, typing furiously. Vanguard Holdings isn't an investment account, Ms. Jenkins. It's a pass-through entity. Pass-through for who? Aurora asked. That's the weird part. Money didn't go out to Vanguard. Money came in. Huge sums. In 2018, when the market crashed and Sterling Dynamics was supposedly broke, Vanguard wired $50 million into the operating account. It saved the company. Aurora turned to Alexander. You told me you saved the company with your genius trading strategies. You lied. You took a bailout. Alexander put his head in his hands. I had to. We were going under. Who gave you the money, Alexander? Aurora demanded. Benji, Alexander said, his voice trembling. Leave the room. He stays, Aurora snapped. Aurora, please. Alexander stood up. His eyes wild with terror. If you say this name out loud and this kid repeats it online, we are all dead before dinner. The room went cold. Harrison Cole stopped chewing his pen. He looked at Alexander with a new expression, not contempt, but calculation. Benji, Harrison said quietly, go get us some coffee. Take a long walk. The boy left, closing the heavy door. Talk, Aurora said. Alexander walked to the window. He looked afraid to even stand near the glass, as if a sniper were waiting. In 2018, I met a man in Zurich. He represented a private equity group called the Helios Trust. They offered me $50 million interest-free. No equity, no board seats. There's no such thing as free money, Harrison grunted. I know that now, Alexander yelled. But I was desperate. I signed the deal. 2 years later, they came back. They didn't want money. They wanted integration. Integration with what? Aurora asked. The AI, Alexander said. The sentient processor. They gave me the specs. They told me to build a back door into the chip architecture, a hardware bypass that bypasses all firewalls. Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. You built a global spy tool for who, the Chinese? The Russians. Worse, Alexander whispered. Private contractors, mercenaries. Helios is a front for Blackwood defense. They supply cyber weapons to whoever pays the most cartels, rogue states, terrorists. If Sentient goes into mass production next month, Blackwood will have a back door into every bank hospital and government server that uses our chips. Aurora stared at the man she had once loved. She realized now why he had fought so hard to keep her away from the company. It wasn't just greed, it was containment. They own me, Aurora, Alexander sobbed. I'm not the CEO, I'm the mule. And now you're the owner, which means you're the mule. Aurora stood up slowly. She walked over to Alexander. She didn't hug him. She slapped him. Hard. You coward, she hissed. You didn't just betray me. You sold out the entire world to save your reputation. She turned to Harrison. Can we stop the launch? The chips are already shipping, Alexander said. The global activation signal goes out in 3 days at the gala. Once the satellites sync with the chips, the back door is permanent. Then we don't stop the shipment, Aurora said, her eyes hardening. We change the code. We can't, Alexander said. The source code is locked in the server room. It requires a retinal scan and a voice key. Mine and the Helios representatives. Who is the representative? A man named Victor Cross. He's coming to the gala. Aurora looked at the calendar on the wall. The Sterling Future Gala. Saturday night. 3 days away. Harrison, Aurora said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. Get me everything you can on Victor Cross. Alexander, you're going to teach me everything about the server room security protocols. Why? Alexander asked. Because, Aurora said, straightening her blazer, I'm going to walk into that gala. I'm going to look Victor Cross in the eye, and I'm going to burn his little empire to the ground. The gala was an ocean of diamonds, tuxedos, and champagne. The tech elite of Silicon Valley had gathered to celebrate the launch of Sentient. Aurora Jenkins stood at the top of the grand staircase. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet, looking like a queen surveying her kingdom. But beneath the velvet strapped to her thigh was a flash drive containing a kill switch virus Benji had coded in a basement over the last 48 hours. Alexander stood beside her. He looked nauseous. He was sweating through his tuxedo. Smile, Alexander, Aurora muttered, gripping his arm. If you look guilty, they'll kill us both. He's here, Alexander whispered. Aurora followed his gaze. Entering the hall was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Victor Cross. He wore a tuxedo that fit too perfectly. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a predator pretending to be human. He was surrounded by 3 assistants who scanned the room with military precision. Cross spotted them. He smiled a cold, shark-like baring of teeth and began to ascend the stairs. Mr. Sterling, Cross said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in Aurora's chest. And you must be the ex-wife, the new majority shareholder. Aurora Jenkins, she said, extending her hand. Her hand didn't shake. Cross took it. His grip was like a vice. Victor Cross, Helios Trust. We were surprised to hear about the change in management. Usually we are consulted on such matters. It was a hostile takeover, Aurora said smoothly. I don't consult, I conquer. Cross chuckled softly. A conqueror. I like that. Alexander here was always more of a survivor. Let's hope you have more stamina than he does. He leaned in close, invading her personal space. The activation is at midnight. I expect the code verification to go smoothly. If there is a glitch, If there is even a single millisecond of delay, my associates will be very unhappy, and when they are unhappy, accidents happen. Cars lose their brakes, houses catch fire. He pulled back, smiling politely. Enjoy the party. Cross walked away toward the VIP section. He knows, Alexander whispered. He knows we're planning something. He suspects, Aurora corrected. He doesn't know. Go to the podium. Start the speech. I'm going to the server room. You can't go alone. The security. I have your retinal scan, Aurora said, holding up a high-resolution contact lens case she had prepped earlier. And I have your voice print recorded on my phone. Just keep him talking. Aurora slipped away into the crowd. She moved through the kitchen past the catering staff and into the service corridors. She reached the freight elevator and swiped her executive key card. The doors opened. She descended into the basement levels of the venue, where the temporary server farm for the launch was housed. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Aurora reached the server room door. She put the contact lens on her finger and held it up to the scanner. Retinal scan, accepted Alexander Sterling. She held her phone up to the microphone and played the recording of Alexander saying the passphrase. Voice print verified. Welcome. The heavy steel door hissed open. Aurora stepped inside, holding the flash drive. The room was humming with the sound of 1,000 cooling fans. In the center was the master terminal. If she plugged the drive in, she could wipe the back door code before the midnight upload. She ran to the console. She raised the flash drive. I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Sterling. Aurora froze. She turned around. Victor Cross was standing in the shadows of the server racks. He held a silenced pistol loosely at his side. How? Aurora breathed. I didn't become the head of Blackwood by trusting ex-husbands, Cross said, stepping into the blue light of the servers. Alexander is weak. I knew he would fold the moment you pressured him. I knew he would tell you about us. He raised the gun, aiming it at her chest. You have spirit, Aurora. I respect that. You took a bankrupt logistics company and turned it into a weapon. That takes talent. But you are playing a game you don't understand. I understand enough, Aurora said, backing up against the console. Her hand hovered near the USB port behind her back. I understand that you're traitors. We are patriots, Cross said. Control is safety. Now step away from the terminal. Midnight is in 5 minutes. We are going to watch the upload together and then you kill me. Then you have a tragic accident on the stairs. Cross shrugged. It's a long fall. Aurora looked at the gun. Then she looked at the server racks behind Cross. You're right, Aurora said softly. Alexander is weak. He never would have had the guts to stop you. Exactly. But Aurora smiled a terrifying, broken smile. You forgot one thing. I'm not Alexander. What? I didn't come here to wipe the code, Victor. Aurora's hand moved. She didn't plug the drive into the USB port. Instead, she smashed the emergency glass cover on the wall next to her. The Halon fire suppression system. I came here to suffocate it. She slammed the red button. A klaxon screamed. The room was instantly filled with a blast of pressurized halon gas designed to extinguish electrical fires by removing all oxygen from the room in seconds. Cross coughed, his eyes widening. He raised the gun, but the gas blast knocked him off balance. He fired wildly. The bullet sparked off the server rack, inches from Aurora's head. Aurora dropped to the floor, holding her breath. She knew the Helon system had a 10-second delay before the doors sealed automatically to trap the gas. She scrambled on her hands and knees toward the door. Cross was gasping, clutching his throat. The oxygen was gone. He dropped the gun, clawing at his neck. Aurora reached the threshold of the door just as the heavy steel mechanism began to slide shut. She rolled through. The door slammed and locked with a deafening clang. Through the thick safety glass, she saw Victor Cross pounding on the door, his face turning purple, his mouth open in a silent scream. The servers behind him began to spark and power down as the system initiated a hard thermal shutdown to prevent fire. The upload was aborted. Aurora lay on the cold concrete floor of the hallway, gasping for air. Her dress was torn. Her knees were bleeding. The alarm was blaring throughout the building. She checked her watch. 12:01 a.m. She had missed the deadline. The upload had failed. Sentient was dead. She stood up, shaky, but alive. She had to get back upstairs. She had to find Alexander before Cross's men realized their boss wasn't answering his earpiece. But as she reached the freight elevator, the doors opened. It wasn't Cross's men. It was the police, a SWAT team, and behind them, handcuffed and looking surprisingly calm, was Alexander. "Miss Jenkins," the SWAT leader shouted, pointing a rifle at her. "Hands in the air." Aurora raised her hands, confused. "I'm the victim. Cross is in the server room. He has a gun. We know about Cross," a voice said. Harrison Cole stepped out from behind the police line. He looked grim. "Harrison," Aurora asked, "what is this?" "I'm sorry, Aurora," Harrison said, "but Alexander called us. He turned himself in, and he gave us the evidence." "What evidence?" Alexander looked at her. For the first time in years, he looked like a man, not a coward. He smiled sadly. "The evidence that you authorized the launch," Alexander said. Aurora's blood ran cold. "What?" "The login," Alexander said softly. "You used my retinal scan, but you used your key card to enter the basement. The system logs show that Aurora Jenkins entered the room, triggered the system, and destroyed the servers." "I saved the world," Aurora screamed. "According to the file Alexander gave the FBI 5 minutes ago," Harrison said, his voice full of pain. "You were the one working for Helios. Alexander claims he was trying to stop you and you sabotaged the room to destroy the evidence of your embezzlement." Aurora stared at Alexander. He had framed her. He had sacrificed her to the police to save himself from the consortium. If she went to prison for corporate sabotage, the consortium would think she was the rogue agent, and Alexander would be clean. "Why?" Aurora whispered. "I told you," Alexander said, as the officers grabbed Aurora's arms. "I'm a survivor." As they dragged Aurora away in handcuffs, flashing cameras capturing her ruined dress and bloody knees, she didn't struggle. She locked eyes with Alexander. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just mouthed one word. "Obsidian." Alexander frowned. He didn't understand. But he would. The trial of the United States versus Aurora Jenkins was the media event of the decade. The courtroom was packed. Every major news network was broadcasting live. To the world, the narrative was simple. Aurora Jenkins, the bitter, cast-aside ex-wife, had orchestrated a hostile takeover of her husband's company, embezzled millions, and then, in a fit of jealous rage, sabotaged the launch of the revolutionary sentient AI, causing billions in damages. Alexander Sterling sat on the witness stand. He looked perfect. He wore a navy suit that signaled humility and authority. He wiped a tear from his eye. "It breaks my heart," Alexander said to the jury, his voice cracking. "I tried to help her. I gave her the logistics company in the divorce to help her stand on her own feet. But she became obsessed. She fell in with bad actors the Helios trust. She wanted to destroy what she couldn't control." The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named D.A. Reynolds, nodded sympathetically. "And the night of the gala. Tell us what happened, Mr. Sterling." "I tried to stop her," Alexander lied smoothly. "I went to the server room. I found her there with Victor Cross. They were arguing about money. When Aurora saw me, she triggered the Halon system to destroy the evidence of her tampering. I barely escaped with my life. Mr. Cross, unfortunately, was hospitalized with severe hypoxic brain injury. He can't testify." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. No further questions." Alexander looked at Aurora. She sat at the defense table wearing the same white suit she wore the day she took his company. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. Harrison Cole stood up. He buttoned his tweed jacket. He walked to the center of the room, leaning on a cane he didn't really need. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison began, "you claim my client entered the server room to destroy evidence of her embezzlement." "Yes," Alexander said confidently. "And you claim she was working with Victor Cross." "Yes, the financial records show payments from Helios to her shell accounts." "Interesting," Harrison said, "because we analyzed those records. They were created on a Sterling Dynamics terminal, specifically your terminal, at 12:45 a.m., 40 minutes after the police arrived." Alexander stiffened. I was reviewing the damage. I must have opened the files." "Or," Harrison boomed, "you were creating them." "Objection," the prosecutor shouted. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "Watch yourself, Mr. Cole." Harrison smiled. "Mr. Sterling, let's talk about the server room. You said the servers were destroyed, melted down by the thermal shutdown." "Correct. Completely destroyed." Alexander nodded. "The data is gone. That's why we only have my testimony to rely on." Harrison turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce a new piece of evidence, Exhibit Z." "This is a surprise, Mr. Cole," the judge warned. "It wasn't available until this morning, Your Honor. It took 3 months to decrypt." Harrison pulled a small black hard drive from his pocket. He held it up. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, turning back to the witness. "Do you remember the property you gave Aurora Obsidian Logistics?" Alexander scoffed. "The junkyard in Jersey. What does that have to do with this?" "You didn't read the deed carefully, Alexander." Aurora spoke up for the first time. Her voice rang clear across the silent courtroom. Alexander looked at her, unnerved. "The land in Newark," Aurora continued, standing up. "It sits directly on top of the transatlantic fiber trunk, the main internet artery for the East Coast." She walked toward the jury box. 3 years ago, when I realized you were up to something, I didn't just lease the land to Norcross Tech. I used the easement rights to tap into the trunk line. I laid a dedicated dark fiber cable from Sterling Dynamics HQ in New York, directly to a server farm in a shipping container in Newark. Alexander's face went pale. "I called it the Obsidian Protocol," Aurora said. "It's a mirror, a real-time backup." Harrison plugged the drive into the court's projector system. "The servers in the room were destroyed," Harrison explained. "But for every byte of data that passed through the Sterling network, including the security cameras, the microphones, and the sentient source code. A copy was instantly sent to Aurora's container in New Jersey. "This is a lie," Alexander shouted, standing up. "That's illegal wiretapping." "It's not wiretapping if you own the company," Aurora said coldly. "And I owned 51%. The screen flickered to life. It was a video file, high definition, high frame rate. The timestamp read October 21st, 2023, 11:58 p.m. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the video played. They saw Aurora enter the room. They saw Victor Cross threaten her with a gun. And then the audio, crystal clear, filled the room. Cross's voice. "I didn't become the head of Blackwood by trusting ex-husbands. Alexander is weak. I knew he would fold the moment you pressured him." The jury gasped. The video continued. Aurora triggered the halon gas. The screen went white with smoke. But then a second video played. It was from the hallway camera. 12:05 a.m. The police were swarming the building. Alexander Sterling was standing with a SWAT officer. Alexander's voice. "She's the rogue agent. I have the files on my laptop. I can frame her for the embezzlement. Just get Cross out of there and cut a deal with Blackwood." The video froze on Alexander's face, a face full of malice and calculation. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Harrison Cole turned to Alexander. "You were saying, Mr. Sterling, about trying to save her." Alexander looked at the jury. They looked back with disgust. He looked at his lawyer, who was already packing his briefcase to leave. He looked at Aurora. "You," Alexander whispered, "you didn't have nothing. You had everything." "I told you," Aurora said, sitting back down. "I'm the owner." It took the jury 15 minutes. Aurora Jenkins was acquitted of all charges. Alexander Sterling was arrested in the courtroom. He was charged with perjury, fraud, conspiracy to commit treason for the Blackwood chip backdoor, and attempted murder. Because the evidence was federal and involved national security, there was no bail. As the marshals handcuffed him, stripping him of his expensive watch and his dignity, he didn't scream. He just stared at the floor, a man who had built a castle on sand. 1 year later, the skyscraper in San Francisco no longer said Sterling Dynamics. The silver letters on the building now read Obsidian Corp. Aurora sat in the top floor office. The decor had changed. The cold glass and chrome were gone, replaced by warm wood and art. Benji, now the chief technology officer, walked in with a tablet. "The cleanup is done, boss," Benji said. "We've patched the security flaws in the chips. The military contracts have been renewed legitimately this time. Stock is up 20%. "Good work, Benji," Aurora said. "And, there's a visitor." Aurora looked up. "Who?" "Isabella." Aurora raised an eyebrow. "Send her in." Isabella walked in. She looked different. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was wearing a simple business suit. She looked tired, humble. "Aurora," Isabella said, clutching her purse. I saw the news about the relaunch." "What do you want, Isabella? I can't get a job." Isabella admitted, her voice shaking. "Alexander's name is poison, and everyone knows I was his associate. I've been blacklisted." She looked at Aurora, eyes wet. "I have a degree in marketing, a real one. I used to be good at it before the money made me lazy. I need a chance. I'll start at the bottom. I'll answer phones." Aurora looked at the woman who had once laughed at her in the rain. She thought about revenge. She had already taken everything from Alexander. Did she need to take the last shred of dignity from Isabella too? Aurora remembered the cold shack in Newark. She remembered how hard it was to climb out of the mud when no one would give you a hand. "We don't need anyone to answer phones," Aurora said. Isabella's shoulders slumped. She turned to leave. "I understand." "But," Aurora said, picking up a pen, "we do need someone to manage the charitable arm of the foundation. We're launching a program to help displaced spouses get legal aid and financial literacy training." Isabella turned back, stunned. You'd hire me after everything." "Obsidian is about turning liabilities into assets," Aurora said, smiling slightly. "If you're willing to work, take the desk on the 4th floor. Report to Benji. Don't make me regret it." Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." "I won't." Isabella left. Aurora swiveled her chair to face the window. The sun was setting over the Golden Gate Bridge, painting the city in gold and violet. She opened her drawer. Inside was the old water-damaged deed to the Newark lot. She touched the paper gently. She had walked away with nothing but that piece of paper and a broken heart. Now she had the world. She closed the drawer. "Back to work," she whispered. Aurora Jenkins didn't just survive. She rewrote the code of the game. Alexander Sterling thought power came from the name on the building, but Aurora proved that real power comes from the details everyone else ignores. She turned a worthless shipping yard into the ultimate trap, proving that when you underestimate someone because they're quiet, you're usually the one who ends up screaming. What do you think? Was Aurora too merciful hiring Isabella back? Or was that the ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and corporate warfare, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story. Until next time, remember, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming the owner. Thanks for watching.